What's up, y'all? Today I'll be breaking down this NFL playoff graphic. It got first place in the poll. I agree with that. It's an awesome graphic, so let's break it down. So for these graphics, I went with all the same style, but just tweaked things a little bit. This was the first one I made. So I knew I'd be using the NFL players in their uniforms, so I just was trying to figure out a way to tie them back to App State, because that was the purpose of the graphic. So we start out with the App State texture that I basically always use, and then we have a picture of the mountains. Looks like the Boone area. So all I did there was I had a picture, I made an ellipse. It's this right here. You just go over to this shape tool and then you can make an ellipse, which this is a perfect circle. So what you want to do when you make that is hold shift and drag it out, make it as big as you want it, and then I just put it up here. So I knew this is where I wanted to cut the picture. So this is the ellipse. Then you just control click the ellipse, come down here to the picture, so you can turn that layer off, come down to the picture, click this layer mask button, and there you go. And then all you have is that top section of the photo. So these are all shadows that I've made, and I've showed you how to make those before, but I'll just go ahead and add all those in. They are for the players and where they're going to be standing. So we have like a bunch of the little half circle shadows that I've told you how to make before, but I'll just do it again real quick. You can skip ahead if you've already seen this. So you're just going to make a circle like that, soft black brush, turn the hardness up, down here layer mask, then you're going to do something like this, and then click Control I to invert that mask, and it's gonna look something like that. You make it a smart object, put a Gaussian blur on it, and then once you do that, you can transform it down like that, and these have the blur and they're a little bit less opacity, so that's why they look the way they do. But basically that's all you do, and you just kind of like stretch it, you know, based on where you want it. So like all these are basically those, just like kind of transform differently, and the lighting that I'm using like doesn't necessarily make sense to have them only going one direction, but I just like the way that looks most of the time, so I did that. These two are just soft black brushes that I just kind of like shaded in right here because all the cutouts will end up sitting right there, so it just made sense. So we have the text at the top, and all that has basically the same effect. So it's just black text with a bevel on it, inner bevel, chiseled hard, gradient overlay, very subtle, so not much at all, and then a subtle drop shadow as well. And then we have the animals. So this is the bison. That's where I cut him out. It was kind of bothering me that you can't really see his foot, so I ended up kind of removing most of that. He has an inner shadow on him, just like everyone else is going to have, and that goes to the top right. Just a color dodge layer at 50%. You can kind of tweak it to make it look the way you want to. And then I use a lot of these exposure layers, so I think most of them are like the same settings, and then I just like change the layer mask, but I just tweak it to, you know, the way that like I want it to look. So like you can mess with all these, but basically this first one is just like the amount of darkness, or if you turn it up this way it'd be light, and then these two kind of mess with like the look of that. So you can tweak those around whenever you're using them, but I got it to the way I wanted it. And then this is when I started making this boat. I was going to use like a Viking character, but it's weird to have like another character on a graphic when the graphic is about the players. So if I had like this random Viking guy on there, too much attention might be drawn to this other guy's face that's like not a part of the situation. So I decided to make a Viking ship instead. And the way that I did that is I found this picture of a boat, which is obviously terrible, but the sail looks pretty good. I cut it out, and like, you know, all these lines are cut off, but it was too much effort to try and like cut them out and make it look right. So cut it out like that, and then all I did was just take parts of the sail, like, you know, I took like this part of the sail and just moved it over on top of the shield, and then did the same thing over here. So just to show you, like, that's what I mean. So turn those two on, looks pretty good. Did an inner shadow because the cutout wasn't perfect and there were some lighter areas on the outside of the sail, so I just wanted to darken that up. And then I put a curves layer on it, which darkened up the whole thing except for the sail, and it's made the sail more contrasty, which I like. So that's just a big kind of S curve thing. And then all I did was put the Minnesota Viking logo over the sail, because, you know, not everyone's gonna like pick up on the fact that it's a Viking ship. They might think, oh, is it like a pirate ship or whatever. So just to make sure it's clear, I put the Vikings logo over it, set it to overlay. You can kind of usually tweak or like mess with all these different styles, but overlay looked the most legit to me, so I left it as that. And then I found this other picture of a boat, because obviously the bottom of this boat is just black and there's no detail. So found this other picture of a boat and cut that out, and then gave it a curves layer. All I did was just pull it down and make it a little bit darker, which makes it a little more contrasty looking. And then I used a hue saturation to make those orange buoys less orange because it has a more modern feel, whereas like a real Viking boat like wouldn't have had those. So I just made those stand out a little bit less with the hue saturation, and on the layer mask I just painted it on top of those buoys. And then I took the sail from the other boat and just put it onto this boat. So pretty simple, and all I did was just like put it down into the boat basically, and then just like mask it out right there. And then I thought it looks pretty good, but it could look even better if it had kind of more of a Viking look. So I decided to add a dragon with some horns to the front of the boat. And this is just like a random picture of a dragon, snake looking thing, I guess. So masked that out, put it on the front of the boat, and put a super harsh curves layer on it, and kind of pulled down the brightness so it would match the boat and not stand out, because I didn't want people to like see it as like a real life dragon. So did that, and again it didn't look like perfect right there. So I made the whole thing one layer, and then I tweaked the boat to like kind of make it shorter, and because I wanted it to fit in the thing. I cut off the top and just made it like a post basically, and then I think I just like tweaked the head and neck area. Actually, I think I do that in a minute. So I changed the color of it, and I give the whole thing an inner shadow, which is the same inner shadow I give this, which is actually like an inner color dodge layer to make the light, you know, hitting it from the top right. So that looks pretty good, but I think the neck was still too extended. So I cut off the top of the neck, put an inner shadow on it, changed the color. Let's see. Yeah. And then there is where I re-put the head on it. So it doesn't look like it's sticking out quite as bad. Gave that an inner shadow, changed the color to make it look like the same color as like the wood on the boat. And that's basically it for the boat. So that took like the longest to actually build, which was kind of annoying, but you know, gotta do what you gotta do. Then I added in these water layers. So it's literally just like images of like splashing water that I found online for free, and changed the color of those to match the kind of aqua dolphins color. And this is another one of those exposure layers, same settings, and I just painted it in where there are gonna be like shadows coming from this guy. Well, some coming from this guy, so you can see like under his arm. So like if the light is coming from over here hitting the arm, it would have like some shadow underneath it, if that makes sense. And you know, all this is not perfect. It's just kind of like, my lighting is not always like super realistic, but it's just kind of like very simplistic lighting stuff. So if the lighting is coming from over here, hitting his arm, there'd be like some shadow below him, you know? So I cut off the bottom of his legs, put another shading layer on him, which is just the exposure thing again, and painted it in where there'd be stuff on top of him, which will come in now. So we have this tiger picture. This is what the tiger picture looks like. So I just basically cut off this arm and then cut off like his head and the other arm. And so here's one arm, here's the other part of him, and then put it over his shoulders. And then I just added another exposure layer to, you know, make it look realistic on the tiger with the shading, you know, coming around him. And then I added a curves layer because, I mean, right there he looks like a lot less contrasty than Akeem does. So when you turn that on, it kind of like matches the light and dark areas. So then I added on an inner shadow to that whole group, because if I did it to just him, he would have like a ring of light like right here, which doesn't make any sense because there's all shadows right here. So I applied it to the whole group of him and the tiger. Again, that's that color dodge thing. Then I added in the next player and that same inner shadow on him with the same exposure layer, just painting in the dark areas because there's going to be stuff right here that's kind of covering him up. All of the shading just like adds depth and realism, if that's the way you want to say it. So then I put that same inner shadow on the next guy, Thomas Hennigan, and the light hitting him from the top right, and then the same exposure layer because there's going to be stuff covering him up right there. So then I have these other pictures of water. Again, all these are just changed to that aqua-ish color with the hue saturation. So all you gotta do is just pull the slider over a little bit and it changes the color from super bluey to bluey greeny. Then we have the dolphin, and I applied that same color dodge effect to him with the light hitting him from the top right. Then we have Kendall Lamb, same effect to him, light hitting him from the top right, and then another water layer. So this is like the same water layer, but it's just copied and pasted multiple times because just one was like super see-through, so that doesn't look great. But if you added in a bunch, it looked a lot better to me. And I'm sure you could find some that already look like this, but the one that I found was too see-through, so I just had to duplicate it. And then I just cut it out kind of like around his body, so that's what it looks like regularly because it's on top of him, and I just brushed away some on top of his body. So then I changed the color of that to kind of match. See, it all kind of matches like his pants. And then I took all of that, that's one big group, I grouped that together, made it a smart object, and shrunk it down a little bit. So that's how it looked before, just transformed it down. So this is all one big group, and then I just wanted to tweak one last thing, so I painted in a little bit of darkness with the curves layer right in here because it didn't look dark enough in there. And now you can see like all the shadows on the floor match like where their feet are and things like that. I added in another water layer right there because this just looked like too perfect over here. So I put that in there just to make it look a little more, you know, realistic and messy. And I changed it with a puppet warp, which that doesn't look too bad either. But I changed it with the puppet warp to that. And then I added in the stars. So this was like the other like App State branding constant throughout all of my playoff graphics for them. So I had to find a good place for the stars in each of them, and they all kind of ended up different, but you know, they still take care of the look. So then we have the names, and they get the same effect as this text up here. So we have the small text for the first name, big text for the last name, which is a good way if your graphic is looking cluttered and you have a name on there. Usually the last name is going to be more important, and the first name, like, yes, you want it to be readable, but like sometimes the first name doesn't even need to be readable because the last name is what is important. So I put the last name in the thicker font usually, and the first name's in the same font, but it's just in a thinner style, if that's the way you want to say it. So I added all these in with their effects, and then we have these bars below them. So I have the names on there, but you want to be clear about who plays for what team, because like not everyone will know which guy is which name. So I added just like their colors for their teams below them with like little bars. So that's like a super subtle thing. Doesn't have to be like something that sticks out a ton. It's just like, you know, if someone's like, oh, which one is this? And then they look below, there's the colors right there, and it's easy to understand. So I added in a selective color. So basically I just turn on selective color and I just go down this list and literally just move these sliders until I think it looks the best. So literally all of them, that one's not tweaked much, but most of them are like tweaked a good bit, and it just gives you a look that's your own. So then I added in the bottom info and turned it all into a smart object, and then gave it a camera raw filter. So that's without, that's with, just kind of crispifies the whole thing. And then I did my Control Alt E to create a new layer. Then you go up, once you have that created new layer, you go to image and you go to apply image, and then you turn that image to screen, you convert to a smart object, and you put a blur on it, and that's what it would look like with no blur. You add the blur, it kind of gives it a glowy effect, and then you just paint that glowy effect in where you want it. So that's without and that's with. And then the stars weren't looking poppy enough, so I added them back in on top of that, which, you know, this is never a good thing to do. You usually want to like do this earlier on, like when I first put the stars in, I should have done this, but I didn't want to go back, so I just put them in on top, put a bevel on them and an overlay, and I mean that right there already makes them look a lot better. And then I just put this motion blur, so I copied that layer and then like put it up here and put a motion blur on it, so it's set to linear light. I added a radial blur, and it just like makes it look like they're spinning around. And then I just painted in the back sides. So like we don't want the front of the star. If they're all coming towards the middle right here, we don't want like stuff in front of them because they haven't gotten there yet. So I took away that, and it's just like the motion blur from behind them. And then I added in this NFL logo and just brightened it up to kind of match the rest of the look because it looked a little bit too dark. So that's just a curves layer that I pulled up. I have this little hue saturation layer that I usually kind of tweak the color with to make sure it's not too like red. So if you enjoyed this video, please subscribe and like it, and check out my Patreon if you want access to some of my Photoshop files.